Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the controls of his old cargo ship. The Liberty's Edge was not pretty to look at. Her hull had patches welded over patches, and half the lights on the control panel flickered when they felt like working. But she flew, and that was all that mattered to Jake. He was 3 days out from Earth carrying medical supplies to the colony on Kepler 442b. It was dangerous work. Pirates liked to hit medical shipments, and the space lanes were full of trouble. But the pay was good, and Jake needed the money to keep his ship running. The hyperspace jump should have been easy. Jake had done it 100 times before. He pressed the button and felt the familiar pull as space folded around his ship. But something was wrong. The navigation computer started beeping like crazy. Red lights flashed across the control panel. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. He had never seen error codes like these before. The computer screen showed numbers and symbols that made no sense. The ship shook hard, throwing him against his seat. Jake grabbed the controls and tried to drop out of hyperspace. The ship fought him, but finally the stars stopped streaking past his windows. He was back in normal space, but something was very wrong. The cargo bay doors were open. In space. That should have killed him. "That's impossible," Jake said to himself. He checked the air pressure readings. Still normal. The magnetic field generators must be working overtime to keep the air in, but why were the doors open? He heard a sound from the cargo bay, a soft humming like music. Jake grabbed his pistol from the drawer and moved toward the back of the ship. His boots made loud clanks on the metal floor. The humming got louder. Jake turned the corner into the cargo bay and stopped. A woman floated in the middle of the room, surrounded by a soft blue light. But she was not human. Her skin was pale blue and covered with glowing patterns that moved like living tattoos. She wore clothes that looked like they were made from liquid silver. Her hair was long and white, floating around her head like she was underwater. The woman saw Jake and said something in a language he had never heard. It sounded like singing. Her voice was beautiful, but Jake kept his gun pointed at her. "Who are you?" Jake asked. "How did you get on my ship?" The woman looked confused. She said something else in her strange language. Jake's universal translator started working, but it was having trouble. "I am seeking," the translator said in a choppy voice. "Marriage, no, escape, help." The woman looked scared. She pointed at herself and said a word that sounded like Zarathil. Then she pointed at Jake and tilted her head like a question. "Jake," he said, lowering his gun a little. "Jake Morrison. This is my ship." Zarathil smiled and said something that the translator turned into, "Thank you, Jake Morrison." She floated closer, and Jake could see that she was not just floating. She was actually stuck in place, like something was holding her there. Blue energy flowed from her body into the walls of his ship. "What's happening to you?" Jake asked. Zarathil spoke for a long time. The translator worked better now that it had more words to work with. "I was running away," the computer said in its flat voice. "My father wants me to marry Krexmar the Destroyer. He is evil, he kills whole planets. I used an escape pod with a new stealth drive. But something went wrong. The drive pulled me into your ship. Now I am connected to your power source. If I leave, I will die." Jake stared at her. "You're an alien princess?" "Yes," Zarathil said through the translator. "Princess of the Viridian Empire. And now I am trapped in your small flying box." Jake looked around his cargo bay. It was barely big enough for him, let alone 2 people, and now he had an alien princess stuck to his ship's power system. "How long will you be stuck here?" Jake asked. Zarathil looked sad. "I do not know. This has never happened before. Maybe days, maybe forever." A new alarm started beeping. Jake ran back to the control room and checked his sensors. 3 large ships had just appeared near his position. They were sleek and beautiful, nothing like his patched-up freighter. "Viridian ships," Zarathil said. She had followed him to the control room, floating through the walls like a ghost. "They are looking for me." The communication system crackled. A cold voice spoke in perfect English. "Human vessel, you are carrying stolen property of the Viridian Empire. Prepare to be boarded." Jake looked at Zarathil. She was shaking her head. "They will take me back to my father," she said. "And you will be killed for helping me." Jake had 2 choices. He could hand over the princess and hope the aliens let him live. Or he could run. Running meant fighting ships that could probably destroy him with 1 shot. But Jake had never been good at giving up. He reached for the engine controls. "Hold on, princess," Jake said. This is going to get rough. The Liberty's Edge turned and accelerated away from the alien ships. Jake pushed the engines as hard as they would go. Behind him, the Viridian ships followed like angry wolves. Jake's ship was old and patched, but she was fast when she needed to be. He dove toward a nearby asteroid field, hoping the rocks would give him cover. The Viridian ships fired warning shots that lit up space around him. "Why are you helping me?" Zarathil asked. She was holding onto a wall, looking scared but also curious. Jake did not answer right away. He was too busy flying between asteroids the size of buildings. Finally, he said, "Because everyone deserves to choose who they marry. Even alien princesses." Zarathil stared at him. No one had ever put themselves in danger for her before. In her world, people did what they were told. But this human was different. The chase continued deeper into the asteroid field. Jake's ship groaned and shook as he pushed her to her limits. The Viridian ships were faster, but they were also bigger. They had trouble following Jake through the narrow spaces between the rocks. One Viridian ship got too close to a spinning asteroid and had to back off. Another fired a beam that split a rock in half, sending pieces flying in all directions. Jake used the confusion to slip away, but he knew he could not hide forever. "They will never stop hunting me," Zarathil said quietly. "Then we better make sure they don't catch us," Jake replied. As they flew deeper into the asteroid field, Jake wondered what he had gotten himself into. He was just a cargo pilot trying to make a living. Now he was running from alien warships with a princess who was literally attached to his ship. But looking at Zarathil's grateful face, Jake knew he had made the right choice. Some things were more important than safety. Freedom was one of them. The chase was just beginning. Jake managed to lose the Viridian ships in the asteroid field, but he knew they would be back. He set course for an old mining station where he could hide and figure out what to do next. The problem was, he now had a very unusual passenger. Princess Zarathil floated around his ship like she owned it. She passed through walls without opening doors and looked at everything with a mix of wonder and disgust. "Your ship is very primitive," she said through the translator. She was examining his engine controls with the same look Jake might give to a broken toaster. "Primitive," Jake said. "This ship has carried me across half the galaxy. She may not look like much, but she works." Zarathil touched one of the control panels. "You use buttons and switches. My people control ships with our minds. You have to do everything by hand like an animal." Jake felt his temper rising. "Well, excuse me for not being born with magic brain powers." "It is not magic," Zarathil said seriously. "It is evolution. The Viridian people have moved beyond the need for crude tools." She waved her hand at a broken light panel. Jake watched in amazement as the light flickered and then began working again. But instead of the warm yellow glow he was used to, it now pulsed with the same blue energy that surrounded Zarathil. "Don't touch my stuff," Jake said quickly. "I don't know what that energy does to human technology." Zarathil looked hurt. "I was helping. Your ship is full of broken things." "Those broken things have kept me alive for 10 years, Jake said. "I know how to fix them when they break. I don't know how to fix alien magic." This was the start of many arguments. Zarathil could not understand why Jake insisted on doing things the hard way. When he spent an hour fixing a stuck valve with tools and spare parts, she could have fixed it in seconds with her powers. When he cooked food in his small kitchen, she pointed out that her people had given up eating centuries ago. "You absorb energy directly from space," Jake said. "Good for you. I like food. It tastes good." Zarathil watched him eat a sandwich with the same fascination Jake might watch an alien ritual. "You put dead plants and animal products in your mouth and grind them with your teeth. It's called eating, princess. Most living things do it. Most primitive living things," Zarathil corrected. Jake was starting to understand why she had run away from home. Her people sounded about as much fun as a tax audit. The real problem started when Zarathil tried to take control of the ship. As a princess, she was used to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. She did not understand that Jake was the captain of his own vessel. "We should go to the Andromeda galaxy," she announced one morning. "My people have allies there who would help us." "Andromeda is 2 million light years away," Jake said. "This ship can't make that trip." "Then we will upgrade it," Zarathil said. She started to float toward the engine room. "No," Jake said firmly. "You're not upgrading anything." Zarathil stopped and stared at him. "I am a princess of the Viridian Empire. You will do as I command." "I'm the captain of this ship," Jake said. You're a passenger. A very strange passenger who's stuck to my power system, but still just a passenger. Zarathil's glowing patterns flared brighter. Jake felt a strange pressure in his head, like someone was trying to push their way into his thoughts. He recognized what she was doing and got angry. "Get out of my head," he said. The pressure got stronger. Jake could feel Zarathil trying to make him obey her. But humans, as it turned out, were very stubborn when it came to mental control. The harder she pushed, the more Jake resisted. "Stop fighting me," Zarathil said. Her voice was strained. "I am trying to help you understand." "I understand fine," Jake said through gritted teeth. "You think you can control me like you control your technology. But I'm not a machine, princess." The mental pressure suddenly vanished. Zarathil looked shocked and exhausted. "You resisted me," she said in wonder. "No one has ever resisted a Viridian mental command." "Maybe you've never met anyone stubborn enough," Jake said. "Or maybe humans are just naturally difficult." This gave Zarathil a lot to think about. In her world, advanced beings commanded and lesser beings obeyed. But Jake had proven that humans did not fit into that simple system. Their biggest test came when Zarathil decided to improve Jake's navigation computer. She thought she was being helpful. The result was a system that tried to plot courses through dimensions that did not exist in normal space. "What did you do?" Jake asked as alarms screamed and the ship spun out of control. "I upgraded your navigation to access the quantum fold network," Zarathil said proudly. "Now you can travel anywhere in the galaxy in minutes." "My ship can't handle quantum fold travel," Jake shouted as he fought to regain control. "Human technology doesn't work that way." Sparks flew from the control panels. The main engine made a grinding noise that Jake had never heard before. The ship shook like it was coming apart. Jake worked frantically to disconnect Zarathil's improvements before they killed them both. He had to crawl into access tunnels and reroute power conduits by hand while the ship bucked like an angry horse. "I do not understand," Zarathil said as Jake worked. "Viridian technology always improves primitive systems." "Your technology is based on energy manipulation," Jake said, his voice muffled by the access panel he was working behind. "Mine is based on mechanical systems and chemical reactions. They don't mix." It took Jake 3 hours to undo Zarathil's help. When he was done, the navigation computer worked the same way it always had, but at least it worked. "I was trying to help," Zarathil said quietly. Jake looked at her. She actually looked sorry, which was the first time he had seen her show any doubt about Viridian superiority. "I know," Jake said, "but sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways." "That is impossible," Zarathil said automatically. Then she stopped and looked around the ship. "But your primitive ship has taken us further than my advanced escape pod did." It was a small admission, but it was a start. Their relationship began to change after that. Zarathil still thought human technology was crude, but she started to see that crude did not always mean useless. Jake stopped getting angry when she criticized his ship and started explaining why he did things the way he did. "You fix things by hitting them with tools," Zarathil observed as Jake repaired a stuck cargo door with a hammer. "Sometimes the direct approach works best," Jake said. "Not everything needs to be complicated." Zarathil watched him work. The hammer was crude, but it got the job done. Her people would have used precise energy fields and quantum manipulators. Jake used a chunk of metal on a stick. Both methods worked. "Your people are strange," she said. "Your people are stranger," Jake replied. "But I'm starting to think that might not be a bad thing." They were interrupted by an alarm from the sensor array. Jake ran to the control room and saw something that made his blood run cold. 6 large ships had just appeared on his sensors. They were black and covered with weapon ports. "Those are not Viridian ships," Zarathil said. Her face went pale. "Then who are they?" Jake asked. Zarathil closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were full of fear. "Krexmar," she whispered. "He found us." The black ships moved like predators closing in on their prey. Jake had never seen vessels like these before. They were covered in spikes and weapon ports, and they radiated menace even through the cold vacuum of space. "Tell me about Krexmar," Jake said as he pushed his engines to full power. Zarathil's glowing patterns pulsed with fear. "He calls himself the Destroyer. He has conquered 12 star systems. When planets refuse to surrender, he burns them from orbit and watches the population die." "Sounds like a charming guy," Jake muttered. "Why does your father want you to marry him?" Political alliance, Zarathil said bitterly. Krexmar's army combined with Viridian technology would make them unstoppable. My father thinks it is worth trading his daughter for that power. The communication system crackled to life. A harsh voice spoke in heavily accented English. Little princess, you have led us on quite a chase, but the game is over. Surrender now and I might let your human pet live long enough to watch our wedding. Jake grabbed the microphone. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Liberty's Edge. The princess is under my protection. Back off. Laughter came through the speakers. A human thinks he can protect royalty from me? How amusing. I will enjoy killing you slowly. Jake cut the communication and focused on flying. The black ships were faster than his old freighter, but Jake knew tricks they did not. He dove toward a nearby gas giant, using its gravity well to help accelerate his ship. What are you doing? Zarathil asked. Something stupid, Jake replied. Hold on. He skimmed the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, using the dense gases to hide his ship's heat signature. The black ships followed, but they were not designed for atmospheric flight. Their sleek hulls began to overheat in the thick air. One of Krexmar's ships fired an energy weapon that lit up the sky. The beam missed Jake's ship but boiled away tons of atmosphere. Jake used the explosion to hide his escape vector as he shot back into space. Clever, Zarathil said. But they will not fall for that trick again. She was right. The black ships regrouped and began a coordinated attack. They fired nets of energy that Jake barely avoided by spinning his ship like a corkscrew. One net clipped his starboard engine and warning lights flashed across his control panel. Jake needed somewhere to make a stand. He remembered an old asteroid mining facility not far from their position. It had been abandoned for years, but the tunnels and equipment might give him an advantage. There, he said, pointing at the facility on his screen. We can lose them in the mining tunnels. That is a dead end, Zarathil protested. We will be trapped. Sometimes you have to go through a trap to get out of one, Jake said. He flew his damaged ship toward the facility as fast as the remaining engine would take them. The black ships followed, firing constantly. Jake's shields were failing, and his hull was starting to buckle under the assault. The mining facility was a maze of tunnels and processing chambers carved into a large asteroid. Jake flew into the main tunnel just as his shields collapsed completely. Behind him, Krexmar's ships followed like wolves chasing a wounded deer. But Jake had an advantage. He was desperate, and desperate humans were capable of amazing things. The mining tunnels were barely wide enough for his ship. The black ships had trouble following him through the narrow passages. Jake used every trick he knew, flying through chambers where the ceiling was only meters above his hull. In one processing chamber, Jake spotted something useful. Old mining charges were still attached to the tunnel walls. Jake armed his ship's small laser cannon and fired at the charges as he flew past. The explosion brought down half the tunnel ceiling. 2 of Krexmar's ships were caught in the collapse. One was destroyed completely, and the other was trapped under tons of rock. How did you know those charges were there? Zarathil asked in amazement. I used to work in asteroid mines, Jake said. I know how these places are built. But the victory was temporary. The remaining ships were being more careful now, and Jake was running out of tunnel. He needed a new plan. That was when Zarathil surprised him. I can help, she said. But you must trust me. Jake looked at her. A few days ago, she had nearly destroyed his ship trying to help. But she was different now. The fear and desperation had changed her. What do you need? Jake asked. Connect me directly to your ship's computer, Zarathil said. I can merge my consciousness with your systems. Together we can do things neither of us could do alone. It was dangerous. Jake did not know what would happen if an alien princess linked her mind to his ship's primitive computer. But they were out of options. Do it, Jake said. Zarathil placed her hands on the main computer console. Blue energy flowed from her body into the ship's systems. Jake felt the change immediately. His ship responded to his thoughts almost before he could think them. The controls moved under his hands like they were alive. Together, they flew through the mining facility like nothing Jake had ever experienced. Zarathil's advanced mind guided his human instincts. She could process information faster than any computer, but Jake knew how to fight and survive. They led the remaining ships into a processing chamber where huge industrial crushers waited. Jake lured them in close, then Zarathil activated the ancient machinery. The crushers came to life after decades of silence, grinding rock and metal with incredible force. One black ship was caught between 2 crusher arms and squeezed until it popped like a balloon. Another tried to escape but flew into a rock grinder that shredded its hull. Only Krexmar's flagship remained. It was larger than the others and heavily armored. Jake's tricks and Zarathil's powers had taken out the escort ships, but the main threat was still coming. "Impressive, human," Krexmar's voice came through the communication system. "You fight well for a primitive. But now you face me directly." The flagship filled the tunnel like a black wall of death. It was too big to be stopped by falling rocks or industrial equipment. Jake and Zarathil needed something more. "The facility's main reactor," Zarathil said through their mental link. "If we can overload it, the explosion would destroy the whole asteroid," Jake finished. "And us with it, perhaps. But Krexmar would also die. Sometimes sacrifice is the only way to protect what matters." Jake thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned his ship toward the reactor chamber. "Princess," he said out loud, "I hope you're right about this." Zarathil's patterns glowed brighter. "I am learning that humans have their own kind of wisdom, Jake Morrison. Let us see what we can accomplish together." They flew toward the reactor chamber with Krexmar's flagship right behind them. Jake had no idea if their desperate plan would work. But he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to let the princess be dragged back to a life she did not want. Not while he was still breathing. The reactor chamber opened ahead of them like the mouth of a mechanical dragon. Behind them, Krexmar prepared to finish the hunt that had brought him across the galaxy. But the hunt was far from over. Jake's plan worked, but not the way he expected. When he overloaded the mining facility's reactor, the explosion did not destroy the asteroid. Instead, it cracked it open like an egg and sent chunks of rock flying in all directions. The shockwave threw both ships out of the facility and into open space. Jake's ship was badly damaged. Half his systems were dead and the other half were barely working. Krexmar's flagship had also taken a beating, but it was still functional. Worse, the explosion had attracted attention from across the star system. "Viridian ships approaching," Zarathil said weakly. Her mental link with Jake's computer had drained her energy. "My people detected the explosion." Jake checked his sensors and cursed. 3 Viridian ships were coming fast, and behind them were more of Krexmar's black vessels. They were caught between 2 forces that wanted Zarathil for different reasons. "Can your ship fly?" came Krexmar's mocking voice over the communication system. His flagship was moving closer, weapons charging. "I grow tired of this chase, human. Surrender the princess and I will kill you quickly." Jake looked at his control panel. Red lights everywhere. His main engine was dead and he was running on backup power. They could not run anymore. "We have to land somewhere," Jake said. "Make repairs." Zarathil pointed to a small moon orbiting the gas giant. "There, it has an atmosphere, barely." Jake nursed his dying ship toward the moon's surface. The landing was more of a controlled crash. They hit the rocky ground hard, skidded across a frozen plain, and finally came to rest against a cliff. Jake checked for leaks and found dozens of them. They had maybe 6 hours of air left. The moon's atmosphere was too thin to breathe, and the temperature outside was cold enough to freeze a human solid in minutes. "Stay here," Jake said. "I need to see how bad the damage is." He put on his environmental suit and went outside. The ship looked even worse from the outside than it felt from the inside. The hull was cracked in 3 places. One engine was completely gone, and the other was held on by 2 bolts and a prayer. But Jake had been fixing impossible things his whole life. He gathered his tools and started working. Zarathil floated out through the hull to join him. "I can help," she said. "You don't have a pressure suit," Jake pointed out. "I do not need one. My people adapted to survive in space long ago. Together they began the long process of making the ship spaceworthy again. It was strange work. Jake used welding torches and metal patches while Zarathil used her energy powers to seal microfractures and reinforce weak points. "Why are you helping me?" Zarathil asked as they worked. "You could have handed me over to Krexmar or my father. Your life would be much easier." Jake was lying under the ship, trying to reattach a coolant line with a wrench that was too small for the job. "Maybe," he said. "But it would not be a life worth living." "I do not understand." Jake slid out from under the ship and looked at her. "Where I come from, we have a saying. Live free or die. Some things are more important than being safe." Zarathil was quiet for a long time. In her world, safety and order were the highest values. Individual choice was seen as dangerous and chaotic. But watching Jake risk everything for a stranger's freedom made her question everything she had been taught. "Tell me about your world," she said, as they continued working. Jake talked while he worked. He told her about Earth's blue oceans and green forests. He described cities full of humans making their own choices, good and bad. He talked about music and art and food, about the messy beauty of a species that refused to be perfect. "It sounds chaotic," Zarathil said. "It is," Jake agreed, "but it's also alive. When everyone thinks the same way and wants the same things, nothing new ever happens. Chaos is where new ideas come from." Zarathil had never heard anyone defend chaos before. In Viridian society, chaos was the enemy of progress. But as she listened to Jake's stories, she began to understand why humans were so hard to predict and control. "My people eliminated chaos long ago," she said. "We planned out the perfect society. No crime, no war, no suffering. No freedom either," Jake pointed out. "Freedom is overrated," Zarathil said automatically. Then she stopped. "That is what I have always been told. But I have never experienced it myself." They worked through the long, cold night. Jake shared his food with Zarathil even though she said she did not need it. She tried it anyway and was surprised by the taste. "This is pleasant," she said, eating an energy bar that Jake claimed was chocolate-flavored. "Wait until you try real chocolate," Jake said. "This stuff tastes like cardboard compared to the real thing." Zarathil had never heard of cardboard, but she understood the comparison. It was strange to think that humans enjoyed eating things that were not perfectly efficient. As the local sun rose over the horizon, Jake and Zarathil finished their repairs. The ship would fly, but not far or fast. They needed to find a safe port where Jake could get proper replacement parts. That was when the ships arrived. Krexmar's flagship landed on one side of the valley. 3 Viridian vessels settled on the other side. Both groups sent armed soldiers toward Jake's ship. "Surrender, Princess," called the Viridian commander. "Your father has ordered your immediate return." "The princess belongs to me," Krexmar's voice boomed across the valley. "Our marriage contract was signed with blood." Jake checked his pistol and grabbed a rifle from his emergency locker. "Stay behind me," he told Zarathil. "You cannot fight them all," she said. "Maybe not," Jake said. "But I can try." Zarathil watched Jake prepare to face impossible odds. He had one small rifle against dozens of heavily armed soldiers. He should have been terrified, but instead he looked determined. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you die for someone you barely know?" Jake looked at her. "Because you deserve to choose your own life. Everyone does." That was when Zarathil made a choice that changed everything. She floated up into the air where both groups could see her clearly. "I am Princess Zarathil of the Viridian Empire," she called out. "And I claim the right of personal protection under ancient law." The Viridian soldiers stopped. Even Krexmar's warriors hesitated. "I name Jake Morrison as my chosen protector," Zarathil continued. "Any who would harm him must face me first." The Viridian commander looked confused. "Princess, the ancient laws have not been invoked for 1,000 years. But they still stand," Zarathil said firmly. "I have learned something from this human. I have learned the value of choice. I choose him as my protector, and I choose to learn from his people rather than be traded like property." Krexmar laughed. "Ancient laws mean nothing to me, Princess. I will take what is mine." His soldiers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, something unexpected happened. Jake's emergency beacon activated, broadcasting Zarathil's words across the galaxy. Every species that had been conquered or threatened by Krexmar heard a Viridian princess defend a human's right to protect her. Every civilization that had been dismissed by the Viridian Empire heard their royalty admit they had something to learn from. Primitives, the message spread like wildfire through the galaxy's communication networks, and across 100 worlds people began to wonder if the old certainties were really so certain after all. The battle for Zarathil's freedom was about to become something much larger. Jake stood in the middle of the frozen valley with armies on both sides of him. He had one rifle and maybe 50 rounds of ammunition. It should have been hopeless, but something strange was happening. Ships were arriving from across the star system. Not Viridian ships or more of Krexmar's black vessels, but dozens of different types. Some were sleek and advanced. Others were as patched and jury-rigged as Jake's own ship. They belonged to species that Jake had never seen before. "What's going on?" Jake asked. Zarathil was glowing brighter than ever. "My message has spread," she said with wonder. "These are representatives from worlds that Krexmar has threatened and civilizations my people have ignored. The first ship to land was a battered cargo hauler much like Jake's own. 3 insect-like beings climbed out, their translator units chattering. "We heard," one of them said. "Human protects princess who defends choice." "We support choice." More ships landed. A delegation of blue-skinned humanoids, a group of beings that looked like walking crystals. Even some robots whose creators had been destroyed by Krexmar centuries ago. "This is impossible," the Viridian commander said. "These are minor species. They have no right to interfere in Imperial affairs." "Everyone has rights," Jake said. "That's the point." Krexmar was less philosophical. "I did not come here for a political debate," he snarled. "I came for my bride." He ordered his soldiers to attack, but as they raised their weapons, the newly arrived ships powered up their own defensive systems. Suddenly, Krexmar's forces were outnumbered 10-1. "You would start a war over one woman?" Krexmar demanded. "We would start a war over the idea that people should be free to choose their own lives," replied the crystal being. "This human has shown us that even the smallest person can stand up to the greatest power." Jake felt embarrassed by all the attention. "I'm just a cargo pilot," he said. "Exactly," said the insect being. "You are not a warrior or a king. You are ordinary. That makes your courage even more meaningful." The standoff continued for hours. More ships arrived as word spread through the galaxy. Jake's simple act of defiance had become a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The Viridian forces were the first to break. Their commander received new orders from the Empire. "The Imperial Council is reconsidering the princess's status," he announced reluctantly. "We are ordered to withdraw and allow further negotiations." Krexmar was furious. "Cowards! I will take the princess myself." But his own forces were having second thoughts. Fighting one human was one thing. Fighting 100 species that had united behind that human was something else entirely. "My lord," one of his captains said carefully, "perhaps we should reconsider. The political situation has become complicated." Krexmar looked around at the ships surrounding him. His army was powerful, but it was not powerful enough to fight the entire galaxy. With a growl of rage, he retreated to his flagship. "This is not over, Princess," he broadcast. "I will find another way to claim what is mine." His ships lifted off and disappeared into hyperspace. The Viridian vessels followed soon after. "But the other ships remained. What happens now?" Jake asked. Zarathil smiled. "Now we find out what choice really means." Over the following days, Jake's little ship became the center of an impromptu diplomatic conference. Representatives from dozens of species came to meet the human who had inspired their resistance, and the Viridian princess who had chosen freedom over duty. Jake found himself telling his story over and over. How he had been just a cargo pilot trying to deliver medical supplies. How Zarathil had appeared in his ship by accident. How they had learned to work together despite coming from completely different worlds. "But why did you help her?" asked a reptilian diplomat. "What did you gain?" Jake thought about it. "Nothing," he said finally. "That's not why people help each other." This simple answer caused long discussions among the alien representatives. Many came from civilizations where everything was done for profit or advantage. The idea of helping someone just because it was right was foreign to them. Zarathil spent her time learning about the galaxy she had never really seen before. As a princess, she had been isolated from ordinary people. Now she talked to traders and miners, diplomats and soldiers, refugees and rebels. "Your people are amazing," she told Jake one evening, as they watched the sunset through his ship's viewport. "Each species is so different, but they all understand the value of choice." "Not all of them," Jake said. "But enough. Sometimes that's all it takes to change things." The real change came when the Viridian Empire sent a new delegation. Not soldiers this time, but scientists and philosophers. They wanted to study Jake and understand how a primitive human had accomplished something their advanced civilization could not. "We do not understand your resistance to mental influence," one scientist told Jake. "Our psychic powers work on every other species. Maybe that's because every other species wants to be controlled," Jake suggested. "Humans are naturally stubborn. We don't like being told what to do." The Viridian philosophers found this fascinating. For centuries, they had believed that resistance to authority was a sign of primitive thinking. But Jake's success had proven them wrong. "Perhaps," one elder said slowly, "we have something to learn from chaos." This was the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. The Viridian Empire began to question its assumptions about superior and inferior species. Other civilizations started to value independence and creativity over obedience and efficiency. Jake became an unofficial ambassador for humanity, but he never stopped being a cargo pilot. His ship still carried medical supplies and trade goods across the galaxy. The only difference was that now he had a permanent co-pilot. Zara Thiel had found a way to maintain her energy bond with Jake's ship without being trapped by it. She could leave when she wanted, but she chose to stay. Together they visited worlds that had never seen humans before, and showed them that even the most advanced species could learn from the most primitive ones. "Do you ever regret running away?" Jake asked her one day as they approached a new planet. Zara Thiel considered the question. "I regret that it took me so long to understand what freedom means," she said. "But I do not regret finding it." Their ship, the Liberty's Edge, became famous across the galaxy, not because it was the fastest or the most advanced, but because it represented something that many species had forgotten: the right to choose your own path, even if that path led through danger. Jake never married Zara Thiel, though many people expected it. Their relationship was something deeper than romance. They were partners in the truest sense, two beings from different worlds who had found common ground in their love of freedom. The galaxy was still full of tyrants like Krexmar and rigid empires like the Viridians had been, but now there was also something new. A growing movement of beings who believed that choice was more valuable than safety, that diversity was stronger than uniformity, and that sometimes the smallest action could change everything. Jake Morrison, the cargo pilot who had just been trying to deliver medical supplies, had accidentally become the spark that lit a revolution. Not a revolution of weapons and armies, but a revolution of ideas. And in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations and powerful technologies, that turned out to be the most powerful force of all. The story of the human and the alien princess became legend, told on 1,000 worlds to children of 100 species. It reminded them that no matter how small or weak you might feel, you always had the power to choose what was right, even if the whole galaxy was watching.